What if the sky was never blue? Not always. Not forever. Not the gentle ceiling we believe it to be. What if the color we take for granted, that soft wash of daylight, is only a brief moment in a much older story? A passing mood in the long memory of Earth? Long before we looked up and called it sky, there was something else. Before lungs, before leaves, before oceans exhaled oxygen or clouds whispered water into rivers, the air above us was a stranger. Thick, heavy, drenched in gases we now fear, not breathe. Methane, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, gases that would suffocate us now, but once floated freely, undisturbed by thought or bird or branch. Maybe the sky glowed green, not from life, but from the chemistry of absence. Not because it wanted to be beautiful, but because beauty didn't yet exist. Maybe the sky wasn't even sky, but more like a shroud, folding itself around the infant planet like a blanket stitched from volcanic breath and comet dust. No stars, no blue, just silence. Geologists tell us there was a time before oxygen. A time when rust flowed through oceans, when the seas shimmered blood-red with iron, and above them, a haze so thick it scattered sunlight in strange, sickly hues. Green, perhaps, or yellow-gray, or something we no longer have words for. It's hard to imagine, because blue feels eternal, feels safe, familiar, but deep time is not kind to illusions. An Earth's sky has never been still. Atmospheres are fragile things. They shift. They evolve. They forget. The air we breathe is only the latest breath in a long chain of planetary exhalations. Each one different. Each one written in the language of temperature, pressure, geology, and decay. In the beginning, volcanic eruptions sculpted the sky. They birthed it. They filled it with carbon and steam, sulfur and ash. Over millions of years, these gases wrapped the planet in a greenhouse haze, warming the surface, feeding chemical reactions in the oceans below. Reactions that slowly, patiently, gave rise to life. The kind that does not think or speak or dream, but still transforms. Tiny cyanobacteria, floating near the surface of ancient waters, began releasing something new. Oxygen, a gas with no home in the ancient world. A gas so reactive it threatened everything that came before. It was a revolution, not of noise, but of breath. And with this new gas, the sky began to change. The Great Oxygenation Event, they call it. A quiet catastrophe. Because as oxygen rose, it poisoned the atmosphere for nearly every life form that had known it before. It didn't mean to, simply was. Life giving birth to its own extinction. And as oxygen increased, the world itself changed color. Iron in the oceans oxidized and sank, forming the banded iron formations we now find in ancient stone, geological memory, buried deep. Meanwhile, the sky, freed from methane's grip, began to clear. Light scattered. Blue emerged. Not because it was destined, but because physics allows it. Perhaps that's all color is. A side effect of scattering, of entropy, of light bouncing just so. Still, the thought lingers. If the sky has changed before, might it change again? Could it be that we are living in a blue brief, a moment of optical illusion held in place by balance, by chance, by the thin skin of an atmosphere just barely holding on? We don't often think about how thin it really is. Just a fragile veil, stretching no higher than the distance between cities. Peel it back, and space arrives. Silence arrives. And so the sky, this gentle blue, is not infinite, only suspended. Oxygen remains, for now. But so do the forces that oppose it. Methane, carbon dioxide, industrial gases that mimic ancient ones in new forms. We exhale more than breath. We alter the sky itself, not always knowing, not always meaning to. And maybe the sky, in its own quiet way, remembers. Maybe it doesn't forget the epochs of sulfur, the ages of haze, the storms of metal that once ruled its palette. Maybe the blue sky is not our home, but our inheritance, borrowed, not guaranteed. There are stories, too, hidden in ice, trapped bubbles and glaciers that carry whispers of ancient air, sealed away for hundreds of thousands of years. Scientists drill them out like messages in bottles, analyzing their contents, tracing isotopes, chasing atmospheres that no longer exist. Some of those bubbles are green-tinged. Some suggest massive volcanic winters, where the sky went dark and ash circled the planet in silence. Others hint at bursts of methane so vast they may have ended entire eras. Each layer a chapter, each breath a memory. And we wonder, how many colors has the sky worn? How many more will it wear? It humbles us to know we are not the sky's first audience, not even its most lasting. And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? Before breath there was air, but it was not the air we know. It was not soft, nor generous. It did not welcome lungs or lift wings or rustle forests. It was ancient, yes, but alien. Unshaped by life, unspoiled by respiration. Earth's first atmosphere was something older than comfort, older than memory, older than even the need to survive. It was a sky without breathers. In those first long ages, Earth exhaled gases no creature could survive. Not because it was cruel, but because there was no creature yet to consider. Hydrogen spilled from molten cracks in the crust. Methane seeped through fractures like a ghost with no name. Ammonia drifted in slow swirls, a chemical fog drawn from the belly of the forming world. There was carbon too, raw, volatile, unbound, rising from ocean vents and settling in the invisible blanket that pressed close to the planet's skin. The air was thick, not with life but with potential. Volcanoes ruled then, as if the world were speaking in eruptions. Their plumes climbed into the sky, shaping it, tinting it, warming it. Sulfur dioxide and ash settled into the upper atmosphere, turning sunlight into something distorted and strange. Maybe the sky glowed orange or copper or not at all. Maybe it didn't glow, but shimmered thick with particles, heavy with pressure, humming with heat. The oceans below were not blue. They were green or black or rusted red, full of dissolved iron, churning with energy, absorbing heat, cradling chemicals that clung together in quiet experiments. Not because they knew what they were becoming, but because chemistry never sleeps. And inside these waters, protected from the chaos above, something small began to stir. Long before lungs, before gills, before roots or bones or memory, something began to change. Tiny molecules bumped together in the tide. Some clung. Some dissolved. Some, against every odds, endured. Chains of carbon. Threads of nitrogen. Flecks of phosphorus folded in salty spirals. Not alive yet. Not even close. But persistent. Repeating. Practicing. And all around them the atmosphere shifted. Not suddenly, not with fanfare, but slowly, like the long turning of a planet in the dark. Methane built up. Hydrogen escaped. Comets rained down icy fragments of water, dust, and alien organics. Visitors from beyond, arriving not as messengers, but as seeds. Was it chance? Or something deeper? No one knows. Maybe we never will. But the sky was not still. Thickened. Cooled. Then it warmed again. Cycles began, not of weather, but of entropy, of balance and collapse. The air grew dense with carbon, then cleared. It pulsed in invisible rhythms, governed by volcanoes, solar flares, asteroid impacts, and the quiet tug of deep geologic forces. Beneath continents that did not yet exist, molten rock convected in slow spirals, driving plates that would one day fold into mountains, but for now only whispered through pressure. In that kind of time, seconds mean nothing. Even centuries vanish in the haze. And still there was no breath, no wind shaped by wings, no exhale from forests, no thunder of lungs filling and emptying. The air was still only chemistry, but it was learning. It was layering. Trapping sunlight, reflecting heat, mixing in ways that wrote the prologue for what was to come. Even now, traces of that primordial sky remain. In zircon crystals older than any fossil, we find isotopes that speak of a time before oxygen. In ancient basalt flows, frozen in deep rock, we trace the fingerprints of gases long gone from the modern world. And deep beneath the seafloor, inside sediment layers that have not seen sunlight in billions of years, tiny bubbles wait, not full of life but of air. the air before breath. We often forget that the sky has changed so much, that it is not fixed, not permanent, not immune to time. But it too is geology. Too is written, erased, rewritten again. Just in gases, not granite. And perhaps this is why the atmosphere feels like a memory. Something that isn't quite tangible but never leaves us. We breathe without noticing. We live inside it. We trust it. But it hasn't always been ours. It was born wild. It evolved just like everything else. And so we wonder, if Earth once held an air we couldn't breathe, is it possible it could do so again? Not because it wants to, but because it can. And in that possibility, in that fragile uncertainty, we begin to ask, if breath itself can vanish, what does that mean for memory? Because the air does not just shape life, it records it. And the first true traces of breath are found not in sky, but in stone. The surface of the earth is not solid in the way we think it is. Crumbles. It shifts. It peels back slowly, grain by grain, carried by water, loosened by wind, broken by freeze and thaw and time. Erosion is not destruction. It is memory set free. It is the planet revealing what it once held close. We walk atop forgotten stories. Beneath our feet lie chapters of the atmosphere we never breathed, oceans we never touched, forests we never saw, the cliffs that rise beside us, the canyons that cut deep, the plateaus weathered to stony silence. They are not just landscapes. They are archives. Each layer a sentence. Each fracture a pause. Each fossil a whisper. Sediment holds time the way a glacier holds air. Buried, quiet, patient. Tiny grains of silt settle in lakes, in seas, in the hollows of long-vanished rivers. Over thousands of years they press into each other, compressing, recording. Dust becomes clay. Clay becomes shale. Shale becomes a page in the book of Earth. We drill into that book. We core into the seafloor, pull up columns of layered silence. Pale dark, pale again. Tinted by the rise and fall of carbon, of oxygen, of dust from distant deserts or distant times. Every layer tells a story we cannot witness but can feel, in isotopes, in pollen, in fragments of shells worn to powder. There are cliffs now that were once the bottoms of ancient seas, stacked high with limestone made from skeletons smaller than sand. Creatures long gone, but not gone. Their presence still shapes the chemistry of rock, the porosity of stone, the very scent of the soil after rain. They speak without breath, of atmospheres that rose and fell, of temperatures that crept upward, then fell away, of extinctions that left nothing but silence and silt. Erosion is not fast. It is not sudden. It is the rhythm of time at its most patient. Not because it must be, but because it can. A mountain takes millions of years to form, and millions more to wear away. And in that wearing, it tells us what it once was. It offers its memory to gravity and to rivers, not in surrender, but in return. And so we find seashells on high cliffs, fossils embedded in desert rock, layers of ancient ash hidden beneath soft forest loam, each out of place, each exactly where it should be. Could it be that the earth forgets nothing, only misplaces it? Perhaps the testimony of erosion is not just what's removed, but what remains. A single trilobite's outline, a ripple pattern fossilized in sandstone, the trace of rain on volcanic ash, petrified by a sudden flood. Moments so small, yet so impossibly old, they fold time in ways our minds can't hold. We touch them not to understand, but to remember that there was once a world where these things mattered. And maybe they still do. Sometimes we find pollen, trapped in lakebed sediments, sealed in ice, caught in peat bogs untouched by sun for 10,000 years. Grains so tiny, so fragile, yet intact. Proof that a certain tree once grew here in this place under a sky we never saw. What color was that sky? What song did that wind carry? Was the air heavy with heat, or was it thin with coming frost? We don't know, but the rock remembers. And when tectonic plates push downward, carrying old seabeds into the mantle subduction, even then the story does not end. Some of those minerals return in volcanic eruptions. recycled, rewritten, revealed again. Lava from the Earth's interior can contain traces of ocean sediments hundreds of millions of years old. Is it possible that the planet speaks in cycles? That every act of erosion is mirrored by a return? Maybe not. Maybe it's just chemistry. Maybe it's just pressure, heat, motion. But maybe it's something more. A kind of planetary dreaming. A loop that turns soil into sediment, sediment into stone, and stone into story. And as we stand before a cliff face, or gaze into a canyon, or hold a fragment of shale in our hand, we are listening. Not to the wind, but to the weight of time. And yet, some layers vanish entirely. Erased by glaciers, lost to landslides, dissolved by rain. What was written, gone. What was spoken, silenced. If entire ages can disappear beneath the erosion of memory, then what else or who else might be missing? Some stories are not lost in the dust, but suspended in the air and dissolved in the sea. There was once a time not measured in centuries or even in epochs, but in the slow arithmetic of billions, when the world did not resemble the place we know. The continents had not yet scattered into their familiar puzzle. The moon closer, the days shorter, and Earth itself, wearing colors we can barely imagine. Picture an ocean, vast and unfamiliar. Not blue, not turquoise, not the shimmering silver of moonlit surf, but rust red, thick with dissolved iron. The seas carried a burden of chemistry, not yet touched by breath. Iron, pulled from volcanic rocks and hydrothermal vents, filled the water in a silent concentration, unseen from the surface, until something began to change. Above these iron seas, the sky held a different face. Pale, opaque green. Not the soft green of leaves or spring, but a muted glow, filtered through layers of methane and haze, touched by the first hints of a gas that would one day define us. Oxygen. But oxygen didn't begin with us. It came from microbes, ancient, delicate, blue-green threads floating in shallow sunlit waters. Cyanobacteria, not because they knew what they were doing, but because photosynthesis was a way to survive, a way to turn light into energy. And in doing so, they released a byproduct the Earth had never seen before: oxygen. First, it drifted unseen, unheard. It reacted quickly with minerals, with gases, with anything that could absorb it. But the microbes kept exhaling, breathless and tireless, for millions of years. And slowly the world began to change. The oxygen moved upward into the sky and downward into the sea. And there it met the iron. And iron rusts. As oxygen met the iron-rich water, a silent transformation began. The oceans turned from red to gray to blue, as the iron oxidized and fell, drifting to the seafloor in endless curtains of sediment. Layer upon layer, painting the seabed with banded iron formations. A quiet burial of chemistry and time. These rocks remain with us still, found in ancient crusts on every continent. A fossil record not of bone, but of breath. What color was the sky as this happened? We don't know, but models suggest green. A soft, diffuse light, filtered through methane and carbon haze, altered by the slow rise of oxygen's transparency. Perhaps it glowed like oxidized copper. Perhaps it flickered with auroras unfamiliar to our eyes. A sky in transition, planet between states. A moment where the chemistry of Earth was rewriting the possibilities of life. Not with violence, but with light. And yet, the world would not change quietly. As oxygen increased, it began to disrupt. Not just chemistry, but life. Many early microbes depended on anoxic conditions, environments without oxygen. For them, oxygen was poison. As the atmosphere transformed, so did the rules of survival. Extinctions swept through the microbial world, unseen and unrecorded. A silent mass death, one of the first. The Great Oxygenation Event, as we now call it, wasn't sudden. It took hundreds of millions of years. But in the language of planets, it was a heartbeat. Entropy guides all things toward disorder, but sometimes, paradoxically, life increases order, even as it sows the seeds of decay. The rise of oxygen made complex metabolism possible. It gave rise to cells with nuclei, to the potential for nervous systems, for motion, for thought. But in doing so, it erased what came before. Could it be that every layer of progress is built on a layer of forgetting? Perhaps memory, like iron, settles quietly to the bottom. And we ask, what would it feel like to stand on the edge of an ancient shore, watching green light shimmer in the sky and red tides roll against the land? Would we see beauty in it? Or dread? Would we even recognize it as Earth? There are places today, rare, hidden, untouched, where we catch glimpses of this past. In deep, stagnant lakes where oxygen cannot reach. In hydrothermal vents, rich with metal and heat. In the strange chemistry of alien worlds, Mars, Titan, Europa, places that echo the Earth that once was, or perhaps the Earth that could have been. And it makes us wonder, how many versions of this world have there been? Not in the imagination, but in reality. Worlds shaped not by gods or myths, but by the slow dance of molecules and minerals and microbes. Versions we'll never walk through, but can still read in stone, in the rusted layers of seafloor now uplifted as mountain. The green skies are gone now, the iron seas stilled, but their testimony remains, quietly etched beneath our modern world. A reminder that the air we breathe and the waters we know are only temporary settings in a story far older than we are. And if the seas could turn red, and the sky could glow green, what else could change? What if the air remembered? What if the breath of the past never fully left, but lingered, suspended in pockets, folded into layers of frozen silence, waiting, not in stories, not in myths, but in the ice, in ancient glaciers that have never melted, in snow that never thawed, in frozen sheets so thick, so still, that time itself seems trapped beneath their weight. There are places on Earth where snow never dies, where snowfall after snowfall compacts not into softness, but into history. Antarctica, Greenland, high alpine places where the wind has no memory, but the ice does. And within that ice, hidden deep below the surface, are bubbles. Tiny spheres of air, each no bigger than the head of a pin. Ordinary at first glance, but inside them, the breath of other worlds. These bubbles are time machines, sealed by snow thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, of years ago. They carry within them traces of an atmosphere long vanished. An Earth that once was, the ratio of carbon dioxide, the hint of methane, the subtle fingerprint of ancient forest fires or volcanic eruptions or slow glacial breathing. These are not stories passed down. They are stories exhaled. Stories exhaled by trees, by oceans, by the breath of animals now fossilized or forgotten. And when we drill into the ice and pull these cores from the depths, what we're holding isn't just frozen water, it's frozen memory. Scientists call it paleoclimate data. But maybe it's more than data. Maybe it's a kind of listening. A listening not with ears, but with chemistry. With precision instruments and quiet awe. To understand what the world once felt like. How warm, how cold. How thick the air was. How deeply the seasons sighed. Not guesses. Not myths. Actual air. Is it possible the sky once held more sorrow than we remember? Some layers in the ice show spikes in soot. A sign of ancient wildfires. Burning continents will never walk. Others show sudden rises in carbon. Moments when the Earth warmed too fast, or cooled too quickly. Sometimes these spikes are mirrored in fossils, in extinctions, in the vanished signals of entire species. As if the atmosphere itself cried out. But only the ice remembered. And still the bubbles remain, trapped, waiting. Some date back 800,000 years. Some hold the same air Neanderthals once breathed. Or mammoths. Or the last forests of a melting Pleistocene. What did it smell like then? What did it feel like to inhale that world, to exhale into it? Could a single molecule of that breath now live inside your own lungs? Maybe, maybe not. But the air does circulate. It moves. It loops. The carbon in your breath may once have passed through the leaf of a tree 10,000 years ago. The oxygen in your blood may have been formed by the photosynthesis of a forgotten fern. The nitrogen between your cells might have drifted through skies that shimmered with dust from a comet's passing tail. We are not separate from the past. We breathe it, constantly, quietly, and the ice tells us what that breath has meant. In its layers we find rhythm, glacial cycles, warm periods, abrupt climate shifts that reshaped continents and carved new paths for rivers. All recorded in layers thinner than a page, stacked in endless silence. And now, as the world warms, that silence is melting. The oldest ice begins to vanish. And with it, the last unopened letters from the past dissolve into air once more. It is a strange thought, that the memories we most need are melting away with each passing year. That the testimony of ancient atmospheres is evaporating before it's fully heard. What if there are bubbles, still buried, that hold the secrets of extinction or survival? What if there are gases we've never known, or traces of eruptions, of solar storms, of something older than any name? What if the ice speaks, and we're running out of time to listen? And yet, even as the old glaciers retreat, we find new ones. Even as we lose, we remember to search. Even as entropy erodes the past, we find it preserved in the most delicate forms. Because the sky forgets quickly, but the ice forgives. And far beneath it, sealed in perfect stillness, the atmosphere continues to whisper, not to warn us, not to teach us, just to be heard. And we begin to wonder, if breath can be held for 1,000,000 years, what else might the earth still be holding? Far beneath tomorrow's soil, under the slow weight of centuries yet to come, there may be a layer that speaks of us. Not with language, not with poetry or screens or sound, but with matter, with traces, with things we once touched and discarded, unaware of their endurance. Could it be that what outlives us is the waste we never meant to remember? A plastic bottle, buried beneath a supermarket parking lot. A coil of copper wire, braided tight in the walls of a forgotten building. Fragments of glass from a broken touchscreen, fused into the edge of a landfill. Pieces of us, small and scattered, yet stubborn, resistant to decay, resistant to time. What if, one day, these become the fossils? Not the bones of animals or the leaves of ancient forests, but microchips, circuit boards, synthetic polymers pressed between layers of future sediment. A new kind of fossil shaped not by biology but by industry. Some call them technofossils. Not because they are beautiful, but because they endure. Geology, after all, is not sentimental. It records what is preserved, not what is important. It layers what falls and does not rot. In the language of stone, permanence is accidental. And yet, we are leaving behind a legacy so durable, so widespread, so unnatural. It may one day be mistaken for a turning point in Earth's deep memory. Will there come a time when future beings, human, post-human, or something entirely unknown, drill into the crust and find us? Not our stories, not our voices, but our trace, our signature. Concrete, rebar, asphalt. Elements not typically found together in nature, now fused, baked, layered by landfills and cities in sprawl. Perhaps they'll call it the Anthropocene stratum. A thin, chaotic band marking the moment when one species learned how to reshape a planet faster than it could understand it. Could they find plastic in the deep ocean, buried under silt and whale bones? Could they find isotopes from nuclear tests, spread across the globe in a dust so fine it settled even in the poles? Could they find synthetic molecules with no natural counterpart, built in labs and forgotten on shelves, only to be entombed by rising seas and falling buildings? Maybe. Maybe not. But the possibility lingers, quiet and persistent, that we are writing our own fossil record without knowing it. That we are becoming geology. Entropy plays its part. It breaks down buildings, grinds machines to rust, softens every edge. But not everything fades. Not everything yields. In a landfill untouched by rain, plastic can persist for thousands of years. Deep underground, beneath anaerobic conditions, even paper can last longer than bone. And in the right temperature and pressure, concrete may fossilize like coral reefs made by mines, not mollusks. Some of our trash may outlive our cities. Some of our ruins may outlast our names. And what if they're not found? What if they're only glimpsed, faint magnetic anomalies in the crust, odd concentrations of aluminum or lithium or silicon, puzzling arrangements of rare earth elements never naturally found in those ratios. Would the future wonder? Would they sense a pattern? Would they ask, who left this behind? And more curiously, why did they stop? Because layers do not speak only of presence. They speak of absence. They tell us not only what existed, but when it ended. Could our entire civilization, our dreams, our machines, our language, our lives, be compressed into a line of strata no thicker than a finger? Could we be a blink in Earth's slow sedimentation? A sudden bloom, followed by silence? Maybe we already are. And in that silence, there may be questions. Did we know what we were becoming? Did we feel the weight of our legacy while we built it? Did we wonder how long it would last? We think of fossils as bones. But maybe the future will think of fossils as code, as fragments of polymer, as fiber optic cables snapped and buried beneath old riverbeds. Maybe our true remains are not what we built to last, but what we failed to forget. And somewhere, in the gentle crush of tectonic plates, a layer of us will be folded under. Not erased, just hidden, subducted like ancient sea floor, carried downward into darkness, into pressure, into the deep time that does not care for names. And yet, if we are to become a memory in stone, what might that memory say? Will it speak of progress or exhaustion? Will it be seen as a warning or a beginning? And if the rocks can carry our trace, if the ocean floor can record our footprint, might we already be part of a planetary memory too vast for us to see? And so we ask, if we are becoming the fossils, who or what might be reading us? Beneath our cities and gardens, beneath the weight of roads and roots, the rocks continue to listen. They do not move quickly. They do not answer. But they remember, not because they try, but because they cannot help it. We often think of stone as still, as mute, as something outside of life. But rocks are not lifeless. They are memory made dense. They are time, compressed into silence. Lava that cooled after eruption. Sand that once drifted through ancient rivers. Mountains built from the bones of ancient reefs, now folded and lifted toward the clouds. Every rock holds a story, not in symbols, but in texture. Not in words, but in pressure, in temperature, in trace. Some rocks remember fire. They hold crystals that grew inside magma chambers, each one shaped by heat, by chemistry, by the rhythm of molten flow. These minerals speak of volcanoes that rose and collapsed before language, of eruptions that darkened the sky and changed the air, reshaping forests and silencing coastlines. Other stones remember water. Sedimentary layers pressed together in soft rhythmic beds, full of dust from deserts, ash from distant mountains, pollen from vanished trees. Some carry the ripple marks of shallow seas. Others the quiet curves of buried riverbeds. Even in stillness, the shape of flow remains. And some remember loss, the impact of an asteroid, frozen in shocked quartz. The sudden disappearance of a species, marked by the absence of a fossil above a certain line. The boundary clay laced with iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in meteorites, that marks the end of the dinosaurs and the start of something new. What do they remember that we do not? Perhaps the feeling of a mountain being born, the pull of continents drifting apart, each inch a century, each mile a million years. Perhaps the moment oxygen first reached the upper atmosphere, or the first time a leaf ever fell to the ground. There are rocks that remember stars. In zircon crystals older than any ocean, we find the remains of radioactive isotopes. Their slow decay tells us how old the Earth truly is, not in myth or story, but in the mathematics of time itself. These are the clocks of deep time, ticking not in seconds, but in silence. The silence of entropy, slowly unwinding. And perhaps what humbles us most is how little we leave behind. Stone endures, but most things don't. The soft tissues of animals, the breath of forests, the voices of entire peoples, they vanish unless etched in mineral, unless captured by accident. For every fossil we find, there are billions lost. For every imprint in stone, There are histories erased by erosion, by weather, by the quiet, unstoppable forgetfulness of time. Could it be that Earth, too, is forgetful? Not deliberately, just overwhelmingly full. But every now and then, the memory persists. A trilobite's outline, a fern pressed into shale, the shape of raindrops on volcanic ash, the crack of a drying lakebed, frozen in time, untouched for eons. And we hold these stones in museums, in hands, in quiet awe, not because they are beautiful, but because they are true. They are real in a way few things are. They ask for nothing. They explain nothing. They simply exist, still, present, carrying the weight of things we no longer know how to ask. And so, if stone can remember the fall of continents, the roar of volcanoes, the extinction of life, and the arrival of breath, what else might it be holding? And if memory can hide in something so quiet, could there be other places, stranger places, where the forgotten waits to be found? There was once a time when the sky turned yellow. Not the golden hue of morning light, not the warm dusk of a harvest sun, but a heavy, veiled yellow, dense, sour, thick with sulfur. A sky not painted with light, but cloaked with chemistry. Some say it was volcanic. Others say it was death. And maybe, just maybe, it was something we have not yet remembered how to understand. Sulfur is a strange thing. It is not rare. It is not kind. It seeps from deep beneath the earth, rising from vents, from cracks, from burning rock. It stings the air and leaves behind the scent of rot, of eggs, of endings. But sulfur also tells stories. It moves through cycles, volcanic, biological, atmospheric, marking the turning points of worlds. When sulfur lingers in the sky, something has shifted. Perhaps it began with an eruption, or many eruptions, supervolcanoes collapsing into themselves, releasing clouds of sulfur dioxide so vast they circled the globe, blotting out the sun. The light grew dim, shadows lengthened, temperatures dropped, crops withered, oceans cooled. A volcanic winter begins not with frost, but with gas. Invisible at first, then yellow. In the ice we find evidence. Thin layers rich in sulfur compounds, spikes in acidity, traces that whisper of skies we cannot imagine. The sulfur didn't stay in the sky forever. It rained down as acid, as dust, as particles that settled on leaves and stone. And in some places it settled into memory. What caused it? Volcanoes, yes. But perhaps also something more. Mass extinction events often carry a sulfur signature. The Permian, the so-called Great Dying, left behind evidence of massive sulfur releases. Hydrogen sulfide bubbling from stagnant seas, rising into the air, bleaching the skies, poisoning life. This wasn't just volcanic. This was biological collapse. Oceans warming, circulation breaking down, oxygen vanishing beneath the waves. Life itself decaying faster than it could renew. A planet turning inward, exhaling something ancient and unbreathable. Could the sky itself reflect death? Could it wear the color of extinction? And if so, would we recognize the warning? We tend to think of air as a void, an absence. But it is always full of molecules, of moisture, of particles too small to see. Sulfur changes the way that light scatters. It softens edges. It dims blues. It turns the sun pale and cold, even at midday. It fills the lungs with a silent discomfort. In large enough quantities it makes the sky strange, and memory thick. Is it possible that other planets, other worlds in other systems, wear sulfur skies as we once did? Venus comes to mind, cloaked in clouds of sulfuric acid, her surface hot enough to melt lead, her atmosphere a pressure cooker of chemistry and time. Some say she is what Earth could have become, or what Earth still might be, a sister planet lost to a different memory. But back here, on our own fragile sphere, the sulfur skies come and go, transient but not forgotten. We see them after great fires, after eruptions, in the wake of meteor strikes and collapses. The Earth exhales and the sky records it, not in words but in tone, in hue, in how far you can see, And how much disappears into the haze? What else might sulfur have hidden? Could there have been sunrises no one ever saw? Landscapes that existed only beneath a sulfuric veil, now gone without witness? How much of the planet's past played out under skies not blue but yellow? And how did it shape the world beneath? We wonder, too, if memory has a color, if sorrow has a scent, if entropy sometimes leaves behind not just silence, but sulfur. And maybe, just maybe, there are atmospheres we've never known, not because they never were, but because they left no trace we yet know how to read. And so, as we breathe the clear air of now, we drift through the possibilities of before. Through skies that once burned, through gases that once ruled, through yellow veils that once meant something more than weather. And if the sky has worn sulfur, and if sulfur sings of endings, then what does it mean when we begin to smell it again? Extinction has no sound. It arrives quietly, often slowly, though sometimes with a sharpness too vast for the moment to hold. It does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, but Earth remembers, keeps the pulse. Across deep time, the story of life is not one of steady growth, but of rhythm, of arrival, of flourishing, of collapse. The fossil record does not lie in a single, even line. It stutters. It breaks. It pauses, as though something once steady skipped a beat. And each of these interruptions leaves a scar. Not in the way a wound bleeds, but in how the world reshapes around its absence. Some of those scars are written in iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in the cosmos. A trace metal barely measurable, yet sharply spiked in the thin layer that marks the end of the Cretaceous. A boundary no thicker than a coin, stretched across the world, from clay cliffs in Denmark to canyons in New Mexico. It is the fingerprint of an impact, a single moment that ended the reign of the dinosaurs and lit fires across the sky. Other scars are written in isotopes, carbon, oxygen, sulfur, ratios that shift suddenly, as if the planet inhaled something strange. A massive methane release, a surge in volcanic gas, a sudden warming or cooling that tips ecosystems past the point of return. These shifts are not guesses. They are real, measurable, captured in the shells of plankton, in layers of rock, in the calcium bones of animals that no longer breathe. But what we still don't know is whether these pulses are accidents, or something deeper. Are they chaotic stumbles in the long walk of life? Or are they rhythmic, cyclical, like a planetary heartbeat we have only just begun to hear? Some researchers think there is a pattern, that every 26 million years, give or take, there's a spike in extinctions. A wave, a breath out, and then silence. Could it be a galactic tide, pulling comets from the Oort cloud into Earth's path? Could it be the wobble of the solar system as we drift through denser regions of the Milky Way? Or is it something closer, something earthbound, tectonic surges, supervolcanoes, buried feedback loops in the chemistry of life? Maybe it's all of these. Maybe it's none. But it raises the question, does the Earth have a memory of endings? Not just one, but many? And if so, does it also carry the memory of recovery? Because extinction, as devastating as it is never the end. After the silence comes renewal. After the collapse, a strange resilience. Life returns, reshaped, unfamiliar. Ferns erupt after fire. Mammals rise after meteors. Microbes bloom in the wake of poison. But the world that comes back is never the same. Carries the echo of what was lost. And sometimes, it carries the trace in its bones. Trilobites vanish from the ocean floor, but their outline remains in shale. Ammonites spiral out of deep time, only to end in a thin, vanishing line. Even the great forests of the Carboniferous, strange, towering, and alien, left behind the coal seams that now burn in our power plants. The memory of life turned to fuel. Is it possible, then, that extinction is not just an end but a message? A marker? A pulse that reminds the Earth how to change? The air carries signs, too. In trapped gases we find sharp rises in carbon, sudden drops in oxygen. In ash layers we find sulfur and soot. In lake beds the pollen changes, vanishes, returns. Even the dust itself changes: particle size, mineral content, magnetic signatures. The entire planet seems to flinch. But extinction does not happen everywhere all at once. It ripples. It builds. Sometimes it waits. Could we be in one now? Not the kind that arrives overnight, but the kind that builds beneath our feet, silent, steady, slow. A pulse so long we don't feel it until it's past. What if the beat is already underway? And more haunting still, what if we've been part of the rhythm longer than we realize? Maybe extinction is not always destruction. Maybe sometimes it's transition. Not because life chooses it, but because conditions shift in ways that no species can resist. Entropy again. Not cruel. Just inevitable. Still, we wonder, are the pulses growing closer? Are they louder now? Or are we simply better at hearing them? And if extinction leaves behind echoes in stone, in air, in bone, where else might those echoes be? And so we listen, not just to the earth beneath us, but to the silence that sometimes follows. And if the pulse is real, if Earth does keep time in extinction, then what, we ask, marks the return? Perhaps nothing returns. Not really. Not entirely. Perhaps the world doesn't circle back so much as it unravels. Slowly, gently, inevitably. Not in a collapse, but in a loosening. In a drift. Entropy. The quiet law that says order will always decay, that heat will always spread, that things left untouched will fall not into chaos, but into stillness. Entropy does not destroy, it balances, and in the sky it breathes. The atmosphere, that delicate veil stretched thin above our world, is not constant. It flows, it scatters, it reacts. It forgets what was just there and reshapes itself every second. But behind all that motion is a soft, unseen slope, a gradual tipping, almost imperceptible, where energy disperses, molecules mix, and structure dissolves. Entropy whispers through carbon ratios. Not because the carbon wants to change, but because balance demands it. A molecule of CO2 doesn't vanish, it lingers. It warms. It shifts the path of light and the rhythm of cloud. With every volcanic exhale, every leaf that falls, every engine that burns, the ratios change. And as they change, so too does the story the atmosphere tells. There are isotopes in the air that speak of this shift. Oxygen 18, carbon 13, tracers in the breath of the sky. When snow forms, when oceans breathe, when forests burn, these isotopes move, subtly, silently, leaving behind clues, a trail, a record, a slowly smudging fingerprint of the planet's memory. Entropy makes no sound, but it shapes everything. In the upper atmosphere, ultraviolet light breaks apart molecules. In the lower layers, convection lifts and disperses, always seeking equilibrium. Heat moves from warm to cold. Clouds gather, rain falls, energy escapes. There is no moment of pause. No single frame in which things remain. Even calm is motion. Even stillness is change. And yet, we feel the imbalance growing. Not suddenly, but perceptibly. The air holds more than it used to. More carbon, more methane, more heat. Not because the planet has failed, but because it remembers what we've given it. Every molecule a message. Every emission a shift. We don't see it, but the sky does. It spreads the warmth. It adjusts the flow of air. It slows the loss of night's cold. It alters the very rhythm of seasons. Could it be that entropy at this scale is not a theory, but a weather pattern? That the atmosphere itself is teaching us how imbalance unfolds, not as punishment, but as persistence? Entropy doesn't rush. It doesn't need to. It has time. Deep time. Time that makes mountains small and oceans brief. And as energy spreads out, as gradients dissolve, as ordered systems become open and soft, life must adapt, or fade. And we wonder how much of Earth's past was shaped not by violence, but by slow, entropic drift. Not explosions, but heat loss. Not floods, but accumulation. Not collapse, but forgetting. And if the sky remembers imbalance, does it also remember balance? The calm between tipping points. The brief windows where things hold steady, and breath aligns with need. Were there golden centuries, unnoticed, where entropy paused before continuing its quiet work? Maybe there were, maybe there weren't, but the record continues. The sky writes it molecule by molecule. The air thickens or clears. Isotopes fall into glaciers. Trees inhale a changing rhythm. The oceans adjust their breath. Nothing resists forever. Still, some things endure longer than others. A pocket of cool air in a warming zone. A storm that resists diffusion. A pattern that recurs more often than chance would suggest. Are these accidents? Or are they remnants of a more ordered past? Is it possible that entropy forgets, but also leaves behind echoes? And what, we wonder, are we leaving behind? Not just in carbon or temperature, but in patterns, in disruptions, in invisible nudges that shift the entire trajectory of balance. Will the atmosphere one day stabilize again, but around a different memory, a different norm, a different kind of breath? Entropy doesn't care. It doesn't prefer. It just unfolds. And as it unfolds, it carries us with it. Through winds, through warming, through tipping points yet to come. Through moments when balance feels close, and then drifts away again. And yet, if the sky follows entropy, could it also remember the things we've forgotten to feel? Maybe the memory is already here. Not drifting in clouds or scattered in wind, but caught, paused mid-breath, sealed in the quietest places. The fossils of air are not like other fossils. They do not show bones or teeth or the outlines of ferns. They do not resemble anything we might touch or name. And yet, they hold the very breath of vanished worlds. Amber, ice, and stone. Transparent, unassuming. But each of them carries silence. And in that silence, atmosphere. Amber begins as sap. Sticky, golden, alive. It trickles down the trunk of a tree, trapping dust, catching a wing, curling around a body too small to escape. And then, slowly, the sap hardens. And then it hardens more. Over thousands, even millions of years, it turns to stone, not from compression but from time. And inside it, trapped in perfect clarity, bubbles form. Bubbles of air. Not current air. Ancient air. Air from forests that no longer exist. Air from lungs that no longer breathe. A pocket of atmosphere, suspended inside resin, sealed from entropy, from erosion, from change. What did that air once touch? The leaves of a tree now gone. The skin of a reptile we've never named? Was it exhaled by something now extinct, or simply carried by wind through a humid, forgotten canopy? These are not questions with answers. But they are questions the amber keeps. And then, there is ice. Glaciers are made of snow that never melted. Snow that fell and stayed. Each layer pressed downward by the next until the weight becomes memory. And in that weight, the air is trapped thousands of feet beneath the surface, in bubbles no larger than a grain of sand. But inside them, evidence. The ratios of gases. The traces of fire. The composition of breath. When we drill into the ice, we aren't just extracting water. We're extracting time. Some of those bubbles are over 800,000 years old. Older than writing. Older than language. Older than us. They tell of cooler skies and warmer skies. Of calm and of chaos. Of volcanoes. Of extinctions. Of slow, soft change that moved in rhythms no one heard. The air held inside them is real. It moves. It expands when released. It still holds the shape of the world that formed it. It carries the signature of photosynthesis from ancient leaves, of decay from ancient soils, of balance or imbalance, in the delicate machinery of life. But air can also fossilize in places more hidden. Caves breathe too, slowly, with the seasons. Warm air rises, cold air settles, moisture condenses. And over thousands of years, that breath leaves behind crystals. Stalactites and stalagmites. Layer upon layer of calcite. And within those layers, faint chemical signatures. Isotopic traces of oxygen and carbon. Hints of rainfall. Hints of drought. Hints of what the atmosphere once carried. How it once tasted. How it once felt. We call them speleothems. They do not look like air, but they are. Could it be that the world is covered in these fossils? Not of bone, but of breath? Tiny, unassuming clues scattered across the planet. In tree rings, in coral, in silt, in shell. Each one carrying a whisper. Each one holding a version of the sky. Versions we can no longer see. But maybe, if we read carefully enough, if we slow down, we can still feel them. And if air can be fossilized, if breath itself can be caught and kept, what else might be hiding in plain sight? Could the air remember not just how much carbon it held, but how it moved? Could it remember wind patterns we've never known? Jet streams that no longer flow? Monsoons that once arrived like clockwork and now drift unpredictably? Could it remember sorrow? Could it remember joy? Maybe not in the way we do. But maybe in the way the atmosphere bends light through haze. In the way it wraps itself around the planet and changes the hue of the moon. In the way rain smells before it falls. In the weight of air before a storm. Maybe the fossils of air are not always in stone, but in sensation. The scent of old earth after drought. The hollow hush of snowfall. The strange warmth of a spring that comes too soon. These too are fossils. Ephemeral. Invisible, but real. And yet, even these pass. Entropy waits. It spreads. It softens memory. It wears down the perfect edge of data until only suggestion remains. So we listen while we can. We extract while the ice still holds. We polish the amber before it cracks. We read the stone before it folds beneath new rock. Because air too is fragile. And breath, like memory, must be held with care. And if fossils of air can sleep beneath our feet, what other kinds of memory lie waiting in silence? Maybe the silence left behind by people is different from the silence left behind by oceans or winds or time. Maybe there's a kind of hush that only follows something once spoken, a kind of stillness that comes not from absence, but from forgetting. Not everything lost was erased by time alone. Some things slipped beneath the weather. We know about civilizations. At least we think we do. We map their ruins. We name their gods. We find the patterns in their pottery, their tombs, their roads. But there are others unnamed, unmarked, not because they were small, but because they were swept away. Not by war, not by conquest, but by the sky itself. Could echoes of forgotten civilizations be hidden in sudden climate shifts? Could there be places where memory was buried not by soil, but by season? Some collapses don't leave behind smoke. Some come with no sound at all. Only a failing monsoon, or a drought that lingers too long, or a harvest that never ripens. And the people once steady begin to move, or vanish, or remain only in the echo of altered air. There is something haunting in the way climate leaves fingerprints on civilization. In lake beds where water once stood, we find pollen layers changing. From lush to sparse, from grassland to desert. We see isotopic traces in stalagmites and shells, the quiet breath of a shifting world. In Greenland's ice we find ash from Icelandic eruptions, paired with lead from Roman mining, then gaps, where the air grows still, as if waiting for people to return. Sometimes the ruins line up too perfectly with the sky. The Maya left behind cities filled with precision. Astronomy carved in stone, observatories aligned to the solstice. And yet, around 900 AD, many of these cities were abandoned. The cause is still debated. But inside the sediment, the stalagmites, the drought layers tell their version. Pattern of drying skies, a failing cycle, a season that never arrived and never left. The ancestral Puebloans, too. Cliff dwellings carved into stone, whole villages emptied. What was it that drove them away? Was it simply the sky? Was it a horizon that grew too quiet? Or a wind that never cooled? Even in Mesopotamia, the so-called cradle of civilization, layers of dust appear between the bricks. Sediment blown in by desert wind, caught between the moments of empire. Not ruins from battle, but from weather. From the slow fade of the rivers, from the retreat of the rain. Is it possible, then, that the air remembers their rise and fall? That climate, not as force, but as rhythm, holds the secret heartbeats of these vanished cultures? And that somewhere, hidden in tree rings and ice layers, we might still hear their footsteps? What if civilization itself is a kind of climate pattern? A warm spell, a brief pause in the larger cooling and heating of the earth. A lull in entropy, a window through which culture can bloom, but only for a moment, before the cycle turns again. Maybe we are inside one now, not because we're special, but because the air happens to allow it. And maybe, just maybe, the past is full of people who also thought their window would last. Could it be that entire cultures have risen, spoken, and disappeared, leaving only a faint dent in the carbon record? A blip in the methane. A layer of charcoal. Could those people have sailed, written, wandered, and then been washed away by a sky that simply changed? There are places in the world, even now, where no one is sure who built what. Megaliths whose origin is untraced. Temples whose alignment suggests knowledge of stars long since forgotten. Could those, too, belong to a climate we no longer remember? We search the earth for signs of civilization. But maybe we should also search the air, because the atmosphere is a mirror, not just of biology, but of behavior. It holds the breath of industry, the sigh of agriculture, the trace of wood burned, of cities built, of collapse, and renewal. The climate does not record names, but it records change. And change is the story of all people. And if the past holds layers of civilizations we can't recall, what might the future forget of us? Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But the air will remember, not with language, not with judgment, but with ratios, with wind, with dust. And so we ask, not just what civilizations have been lost, but how many more might have risen beneath skies we've never seen. And yet, if the sky could hold the rise and fall of memory, could it also carry the silence that comes after? After every collapse there is a pause, a moment where the world forgets what comes next. A breath held between endings and beginnings. The storm, whether fire, flood, heat, or ash, leaves behind not just ruins, but quiet. A stillness that presses into the soil, a hush that settles in the air. What fills the silence after collapse? Sometimes, nothing. Sometimes the silence is real, not poetic, but literal. No birdsong, no insect hum, no rustle of leaves or splash of fins or sigh of breath. Just wind, just emptiness, just the long, low echo of entropy doing its slow work, pulling what was once alive gently back towards stillness. After the Chicxulub impact, the dinosaurs did not vanish in a moment. The sky dimmed, the dust rose, the fires raged, and then came the dark. Not a single night, but a global dusk, lasting months, perhaps years. Plants withered. Temperatures dropped. Photosynthesis paused. And the earth grew quiet. But that quiet is not empty. It's full of waiting. Because after every extinction, life does return. Not the same life. Not in the same shapes or rhythms. But something stirs again, slowly. The silence, though vast, is not permanent. It is the breath before the next breath. The soft soil before new roots find it. The atmosphere cleared or changed, preparing itself for a different kind of voice. What does that voice sound like? In the fossil record, there are long stretches of absence, few species, few fossils, few clues. But then, suddenly, a flourish. New forms, novel traits, not because the silence was failure, but because the silence was transition. Could it be that collapse makes space? Could it be that the earth, in its own way, pauses to remember before choosing something new? We think of time as forward, constant, loud. But sometimes time falls quiet. In lake beds where silt buries memory. In volcanic fields where nothing grows for centuries. In reefs that bleach, then crumble, then drift into calcium dust. The silence is not just loss. It's a shift, a turning inward, planetary moment of recollection. What fills that space? Maybe it's chemistry, oxygen creeping back after depletion, carbon dissolving into the sea, isotopes rebalancing, pressure equalizing, equilibrium, gently unfolding, unseen. Maybe silence is not the absence of life, but the restoration of possibility. And maybe the sky changes, too. After great extinctions, the air shifts. Methane drops, oxygen rises, clouds return, or linger. The atmosphere adjusts not in grief but in physics. The color of the sky might soften, or sharpen. The light might feel strange, as if it carries memory in its hue. What if that memory lingers? What if new life grows beneath a sky still holding the trace of fire? Would it remember the storm it never saw? Would it adapt, pre-shaped by an atmosphere born from aftermath? And we wonder, how many beginnings have started in silence? How many forests took root in ash? How many oceans bloomed from decay? How many futures rose out of skies that once held only dust? Silence is not nothing. It is depth. It is pause. It is the earth exhaling, and then listening. And perhaps in that listening there's a kind of choosing, a direction, a new configuration of life, shaped not by design, but by what can endure, what can emerge from stillness, and find rhythm again. And if life always returns, then what does that say about collapse? Maybe it's not the end we fear. Maybe it's the silence, the unknown that follows, the quiet that holds more questions than answers. And yet, maybe that quiet is where the earth speaks clearest. And so we ask, in that space between what was and what will be, what shape might memory take next? Maybe the answer is already around us. Maybe it's not just in the stones, or the sky, or the silence between storms, but in the breath we didn't know we were sharing. The air we move through, so easily ignored, might be more than chemistry, more than a mixture of gases, more than weather. Maybe the atmosphere is not just something Earth has, but something Earth is. Some believe the planet is alive. Not alive in the way we usually mean, not with thoughts or language or intention, but with self-regulation, with feedback, with breath. The Gaia hypothesis, first offered in the quiet decades of the 20th century, whispered an idea that felt too mystical to be science, and too scientific to be myth. That Earth is not simply a planet hosting life, but a planet shaped by life, directed, balanced, adjusted by the living systems it contains. Could the atmosphere be part of a planetary nervous system? Not metaphorically, but literally. Could oxygen levels, carbon flux, temperature shifts, and cloud patterns be more than consequences? Could they be actions? Could Earth be responding, not just reacting? When the oceans warm, they breathe out CO2. When forests stretch, they pull it back in. When volcanic dust cools the skies, clouds gather. When algae blooms in ancient seas, oxygen rises and shifts the chemistry of everything. These are patterns, loop systems that don't just move, but self-correct. It's not just balance, it's rhythm. The atmosphere doesn't stay the same. It pulses, across seasons, across centuries, across epochs. It contracts and expands, thickens and thins, sighs and stills. When we look at graphs of climate history, we see jagged lines, abrupt spikes, graceful slopes. But what if we're not looking at data? What if we're looking at breath? Could it be that Earth has always breathed, just more slowly than we know how to feel? And if so, what are we inside of? Are we living inside a lung? Not because Earth needs to inhale, but because life needs regulation. Too much oxygen, and fire consumes everything. Too little, and thought is impossible. The balance must be held, not perfectly, but gently, with room for change, with room for memory, with room for collapse and return. Could the patterns we see in the ice, in the rocks, in the isotope trails be signs not of randomness, but of intention? Not human intention, not divine, but planetary. A planet that cools itself with clouds. A biosphere that slows decay with forests. A world that breathes through coral, through soil, through the tides of plankton in the deep. Some dismiss it as illusion, a trick of pattern-seeking minds. But others, geochemists, climatologists, ecologists, begin to listen differently. Because the evidence of Earth as a self-regulating system is not a dream. It's a dataset. It's a repeating curve. is a feedback loop that stretches back through the last billion years and continues through us. When we burn carbon, the atmosphere shifts. But so does the ocean. So do the trees. The planet responds. Not always in ways we like. Not always in time. But it moves. It changes. Maybe not because it wants to, but because it must. And maybe that's all life ever is. An endless improvisation to hold the balance for one moment more. Gaia, if she exists, is not a goddess. Not a being. But a pattern. A mind without a center. A breath without lungs. A system that forgets, remembers, adjusts, forgets again. And we are part of that system. Our breath is the planet's breath. Our lungs evolved in tandem with its air. Our sleep is tuned to its spin. Our bones carry the isotopes of ancient cycles. We are not separate observers. We are participants in the great feedback. And if we are part of the planet's breath, what happens when we exhale too much? What happens when the feedback lags behind the change? Maybe Gaia breathes more slowly than we expect. Maybe she is not panicking. Maybe she is only now beginning to shift in response. And maybe, just maybe, the weather is not just consequence but communication. Is it possible to listen? To hear the world not as object, but as presence? To feel the atmosphere not as background, but as pulse? And if Gaia truly breathes, if the sky is skin, if balance is memory, then perhaps even in chaos, there is a pattern waiting to be heard. And yet, if the planet can breathe and adapt, could it also carry dust in its lungs? Dust not just from wind and time, but from extinction? Because dust never disappears. It settles. It drifts. It waits. It crosses oceans and epochs and species, carried not by will, but by weather. Invisible, weightless, endless. And sometimes, it enters us. Through breath, through skin, through the quiet touch of time. We carry it unknowingly, but it never forgets where it came from. There is dust in the high atmosphere, circling the globe in streams so thin we barely notice them. Some of it comes from deserts, the Sahara's whisper, lifted into the wind and scattered across continents. Some from volcanoes, whose ash rides the jet streams, folding over forests and seas. Some from the remnants of long-ago impacts, craters now softened by green, but still exhaling memory into the sky. And some of it, maybe more than we realize, is older than us. There is dust older than cities. Dust older than language. Dust that once settled on the skin of dinosaurs, on the leaves of primeval forests, on eggshells never hatched. The same particles passed through time. Lifted by one storm, dropped by another, forgotten by all, except the planet. We breathe that dust now, not because we choose to, but because dust doesn't care who inhales it. A particle that once settled on a Tyrannosaurus claw might now land on your pillow. A grain that drifted over a Cambrian sea might now rest behind your bookshelf. We do not borrow the past. We absorb it. In every lungful of air, there are traces of pollen from extinct flowers, of smoke from forgotten fires, of minerals ground down by glaciers that have long since vanished. And within some of that dust, there are isotopes, tiny, radioactive whispers of moments that shook the Earth. Iridium from asteroid impacts, cesium from nuclear tests, carbon signatures from mass die-offs and regrowths. It all circulates. It all lingers. Could it be that we carry extinction in our blood? Not metaphorically, but literally. Iron in our veins was forged in stars. Calcium in our bones was pulled from oceans. And the dust we inhale moves through us, depositing trace elements. Zinc, lead, sulfur, fragments of planetary memory, caught in the quiet flow of breath and bloodstream. We are not sealed off from the Earth. We are porous, open. We are made from everything that came before. And perhaps, just perhaps, we remember more than we think. In cave walls, ancient peoples painted with ochre, powdered iron, pulled from the soil. They breathed it as they worked, inhaled the earth into their lungs as they shaped its image on stone. Was it a ritual? Was it memory? Was it the earliest form of rejoining the dust we come from? Even now, dust shapes us. In the ocean, it brings nutrients. In the sky, it forms clouds. In the soil, it tells of where the wind has traveled. And in the human body, it lingers, sometimes for good, sometimes for harm, but always as connection, always as reminder. What if extinction isn't something that happened long ago, but something we're still breathing? Maybe the dust of lost forests still hangs in the air, slowly settling. Maybe the bones of vanished species became the sediment that fed the grasses we now walk across. Maybe the end is never an end, just a transformation, fine enough to float. And if that's true, then maybe we aren't just witnesses to Earth's past. Maybe we embody it. Maybe every inhale is a ritual, every breath an archive. Every moment we exist is shaped by particles we'll never see, yet still carry. And the dust continues to fall. It falls on new cities, on oceans, on skin, on seeds just beginning to rise. It gathers in corners. It lines our shelves. It slips through sunbeams in quiet rooms. And we wipe it away, not realizing we're brushing off fragments of the very story we belong to. And so we ask, if dust never truly disappears, and if we carry extinction in our breath, then what might be carried in the breath of those who come after? Maybe carbon. Maybe not just as gas or dust or fuel, but as story. Because carbon is not only what life is made of, it is what life leaves behind. A message in molecule form. A record not just of presence, but of change. Carbon is memory. It moves between us, between trees, between oceans and air and stone. It doesn't vanish, transforms. A leaf falls, a body decays, a forest burns. And the carbon that was once inside something alive is no longer in it but still of it, drifted upward, or pulled downward, or buried so deep it forgets the sun. In ancient sediments, carbon rests in thin black lines. Coal seams, oil shales, traces of tropical swamps turned into stone. Each layer a breath, each deposit a silence. We dig them up now, burn them, return them to the sky. But their memory is older than us. They remember warmth. They remember burial. They remember a time when the atmosphere was different. And they helped shape it. The carbon in the rocks once floated in the air. The carbon in the air once grew in trees. The carbon in trees once lingered in soil, or swam in plankton, or rose from lava, or drifted through the lungs of animals that no longer exist. What if every atom of carbon carries echoes, not just of mass and bond and heat, but of where it's been, who it's passed through, how long it waited in darkness before returning to light? What if a single breath holds carbon from thousands of lives, thousands of stories, thousands of forgotten skies? We speak of the carbon cycle as if it's mechanical, as if it's a wheel, but maybe it's more like a song. Long, slow, improvisational. A song with pauses so vast we forget they're still part of the rhythm. A melody made of transformation. In the ice cores, we read the rise and fall of carbon dioxide like notes in a forgotten composition. Spikes and dips that match extinction events, climate swings, epochs named by geologists but lived by forests, animals, wind. In corals, we read isotopes that change with temperature. In tree rings, carbon shifts reveal past droughts, past floods, past breath. Everywhere we look, the carbon speaks. Could it be speaking now? Could the sharp rise we see today be an echo too loud, too fast? A crescendo not meant to come so soon? Maybe, maybe not. But even in this moment, carbon flows. Through us, around us, into the clouds, back into the sea. Stored in seagrass, in moss, in melting permafrost. It hides, it emerges, it balances, and sometimes it breaks the balance. When we light a fire, we awaken buried memory. Not metaphor, chemistry. We are burning the past to illuminate the present. We release the carbon from bones of forests long decayed. And the atmosphere, ever watchful, changes its tone. A little warmer, a little thicker, a little older. Could this be what memory feels like when it lingers too long? Carbon is not villain or hero. It is carrier, messenger. It is what links all living things to each other, across time. We are made of it. We exhale it. We build with it. And slowly we return to it. Even in death we do not leave the cycle. We simply shift our form. And maybe that's what memory truly is. Not a snapshot but a movement. A dance of atoms through light and shadow, through rise and fall, through what was and what waits to be again. And if carbon is singing, how do we listen? And if the Earth's story is written not in stone, but in breath, then where else might that story be hiding, pulsing quietly just beneath the skin of the world? Sometimes it's in ash, because Earth, despite its water and stone, has caught fire, not once, but many times. Quietly, violently, slowly, completely. Fire is not new. Fire is ancient. Predates cities, predates language, predates the idea that things could be kept safe. There have been times when the world did not just burn. It smoldered. The long burn is not the blaze we know. Not the flicker in a hearth or the glow of a campfire or the orange edge of a dry forest in summer. The long burn is geological, epical. It begins with carbon-rich seams buried deep below, with oxygen levels high enough to feed flames across continents, with skies dry enough to carry lightning without rain. And once it starts, it doesn't stop. In the fossil record there are clues, layers blackened with soot, charcoal embedded in rock, fossils of burned trees, not shattered, but perfectly preserved in their carbonized stillness. A snapshot of combustion frozen in deep time. One such moment may have unfolded at the end of the Permian, when the Earth's greatest extinction rolled like a quiet wave through oceans and air. Volcanism in Siberia tore open the crust, releasing not just lava, but gases. Methane, carbon dioxide, sulfur. The atmosphere grew thick, the climate shifted, and the ground, warmed from below and from above, began to burn. Coal seams ignited, forests dried, fires spread. Across what is now China, we find thin, dark lines in the rock, rich in polyaromatic hydrocarbons, fingerprints of combustion. The sky in those moments would have been unrecognizable. Orange at noon, black at dusk. Smoke rising not from a single point, but from the planet itself. Could the atmosphere remember that? Could fire have written itself into the breath of the world? Methane is even more flammable than carbon. Can collect in ice, in permafrost, in deep ocean clathrates. Frozen, fragile, silent. But under heat it escapes, rises, lingers, feeds flames. Some speculate that sudden methane releases, triggered by warming or tectonic shifts, may have lit the match for runaway climate events. Fire from below, fire from above. A planet caught in its own exhalation. And in the present day, we can still see echoes of those long burns. In the coal that powers our cities, once the compressed remains of swamp and fern and sun. In the peat that smolders underground, hidden from sight, burning for years. In the seams of oil shale that catch fire and refuse to be extinguished. Some fires underground have burned for decades. Others, like the one in Centralia, Pennsylvania, have burned for more than half a century, still glowing quietly beneath empty streets. We live among embers. But what if this has happened before? What if fire is not a deviation, but a cycle? A kind of planetary fever, a reset. Not because the Earth is cruel, but because combustion is the language of transformation. The end of one arrangement of matter, and the beginning of another. Could fire be memory, too? Not just of what was, but of what was lost? Because fire doesn't only consume, it reveals. Charcoal preserves structure. Burned forests leave behind casts of trunks, branches, sometimes even leaves. The heat carves fossils into clarity. Some of the best preserved plant impressions we have were born from fire. The very thing that ends also records. And the sky changes too. Ash in the atmosphere cools the earth. But soot in the right place warms it. Smoke changes cloud formation. The balance of gases tilts. The planet adjusts or fails to. And long after the flames die down, the breath of the fire remains. In temperature, in chemistry, in carbon. Could it be that every fire shapes the air a little more than we see? That we walk through the ghost of burns we never felt? We sometimes call this era the Anthropocene, marked by human impact, human fire. But perhaps it's just the newest phase in the Earth's long combustion. A continuation, not a beginning. Maybe the match was already struck long ago. Maybe we are simply holding the flame now. And if the atmosphere carries the scent of past fire, of long-cooled lava, of vanished forests, of coal turned to haze, then perhaps we too are part of the burn. Not separate, not outside, but burning slowly with the rest of the world. Not because we wanted to, but because the carbon sings louder than silence. And yet, if fire can preserve as much as it destroys, what hidden messages might still be glowing just beneath the ash? Perhaps one of them waits beneath the ice, not smoldering, but sleeping. Not loud, but potent. Beneath tundra, beneath seafloor, beneath ancient permafrost that has not thawed in tens of thousands of years, something breathes in slow suspension. It does not move. It does not rot. It waits. Methane. A molecule simple in structure, just one carbon, for hydrogens, yet extraordinary in consequence. Lighter than air. Invisible. But when released in volume, it reshapes the sky. Most methane in today's atmosphere comes and goes, from wetlands, from digestion, from machines, from life. But there's a different kind. A deeper kind. Trapped for ages beneath frozen ground, inside clathrate cages under the pressure of cold and sea. Locked in ice like forgotten breath. Methane that once rose from rotting leaves, from ancient plankton, from sediments in warm, shallow seas. Buried, pressurized, sealed by time. Now it sleeps. And yet, it remembers how to rise. The Arctic is changing. Permafrost once solid as stone is beginning to thaw. Slowly, reluctantly, but irreversibly. And with that thaw comes a loosening of soil, of memory, of gas. As the ground collapses into lakes, as the lakes bubble, methane escapes. First in whispers, then in murmurs, then in plumes that can be seen from space, small but growing. Could this be how the sky turns again? It has before. Some researchers point to the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, a strange, sudden warming about 56 million years ago. The temperature climbed, carbon spiked, and deep beneath the sea, methane clathrates may have destabilized, releasing clouds of gas that surged into the air. The planet warmed even more. The oceans acidified. Some species vanished. Others emerged. But the sky changed. The air, once balanced, bent toward something new. What if it's happening again? Not because of one moment, but because of many. Fires, fossil fuels, thawing tundra, melting hydrate shelves. 1,000 small releases adding up to a slow shift. Not yet explosive, but not entirely silent. A fuse not lit by flame, but by warmth. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas. More powerful than carbon dioxide, molecule for molecule. It holds heat with an eagerness that reshapes climate systems. But it doesn't linger. It breaks down quickly, which means its power is brief, but intense. A short, sharp breath. So what happens if the Earth exhales all at once? Could the sky glow again? Not blue, but green. Tinted by light scattered through haze, thickened by chemistry, shaded by the breath of a planet warming too fast to forget? Would we notice at first? Would we remember what green once meant? Maybe not. Maybe the change would be too slow for vision. But not for ice. Not for coral. Not for the rhythms of monsoon or jet stream or polar wind. Those would shift. Gently. Unevenly. But clearly. Until the world, still turning, no longer feels quite like the one we knew. And beneath all of this, the methane sleeps on. It does not care if we forget it. It does not know that we walk above. It simply waits in its frozen bed, quiet, invisible, older than the stories we tell. But the Earth remembers. And the Earth is warming. Slowly. Unevenly. But clearly. Could there be a moment? Not tomorrow, not next year, but someday when something tips. When thaw reaches a layer too deep. When warmth crosses a line no one saw. Maybe. Maybe not. But still, it waits. And in that waiting there is a question, not just of science, but of memory. Because if methane is ancient, if it carries the breath of past worlds, then what happens when we release those worlds into ours? What if this isn't just warming, but remembering? Remembering skies that turned strange. Remembering seas that rose fast. Remembering a world that once burned, not with fire, but with breath. And yet, if this much lies sleeping in the cold, invisible under the skin of the planet, what other forces might be waking even now, older than us, quieter than wind? Sometimes, memory doesn't sleep beneath the surface. Sometimes it falls from the sky. There were moments in deep time when the heavens did not comfort, but wounded. When the sky didn't pour rain as we know it, gentle, cleansing, soft, but something else. Something heavier. Something corrosive. A sky thick with acid. A sky cracked open by fire. A sky that burned down instead of washed clean. In Earth's far past, acid rain fell not as metaphor, but as weather. Sulfur dioxide released by enormous volcanic eruptions climbed into the stratosphere and mixed with moisture, forming droplets that weren't water, but acid. These clouds gathered, condensed, and then returned to Earth, not with a whisper, but a sting. A rainfall not of rebirth, but of erasure. And yet, the planet endured it. In some layers of ancient limestone, entire ecosystems seemed to vanish at once. Not gently, abruptly, as if the chemistry of the sky itself had shifted, faster than forests or oceans could respond. Acid rain can dissolve rock, alter soils, strip leaves bare, change the pH of lakes until fish can no longer breathe. A sky like that becomes an unseen fire, not burning trees with flame, but melting life with air. Could it happen again? Maybe it never stopped. Today we monitor acid rain from factories, engines, coal. But it's different now. Regulated, reduced, tracked. Still we see the signs. In lakes that have yet to recover. In the slow erosion of statues and stone. In forests that thin without sound. And we wonder, is this a new pattern? Or the continuation of one far older? Because it wasn't just acid that fell. It was metal. There were times in Earth's past, rare, but real, when the sky rained iron. Not the soft particles carried on desert wind, but molten droplets from space. Asteroid impacts, bolides, shock waves that heated the air to thousands of degrees, vaporizing rock, turning it to mist. And then, as that mist cooled, tiny spheres of iron condensed and fell like hail. These spherules, perfectly round, impossibly small, are still found today, trapped in ancient sediment layers, scattered across the globe. They are the fingerprints of planetary trauma. The Chicxulub impact, the one that ended the reign of dinosaurs, likely unleashed a sky of fire and metal. For hours or even days the upper atmosphere burned. Not metaphorically, literally. As ejecta re-entered from space, it superheated the air, igniting wildfires on a global scale, turning the sky orange, then black. And with that heat came particles, iron-rich and alien, falling through layers of sulfur haze and darkness. Could the sky still do that? Could something strike, something unexpected, and remake the breath of the planet in an instant? Maybe, maybe not. But even without impacts, the sky changes. The air, once a blanket, can become a mirror, reflecting too much heat, holding too much moisture, shifting its chemistry with every eruption, every exhaust, every warming sea. In some places today, near volcanoes, geothermal vents, power plants, the air still carries traces of acid. Invisible but sharp. Not enough to harm us now, but perhaps enough to remind us that the atmosphere does not belong to us alone. Could it be that Earth remembers what it once survived, and is preparing to survive it again? Could acid rain be a reflex? A release valve? A symptom of the planet trying to exhale a burden too large to hold? And the metals, the iron, the nickel, the trace elements stirred from deep within, could they be Earth's memory surfacing again, breaking through crust, rising with steam, carried upward by pressure, only to fall back down in silence? The breath of acid, the rain of metal, The sky has worn these moods before, not always with catastrophe, but always with change. And we live in the brief moments between these storms. We walk on the crust that was once scorched. We drink from lakes once poisoned. We breathe air shaped by eruptions no human ever saw. And still we forget how young we are, compared to a sky that has rained fire and a sea that has swallowed continents. And yet, if we walk each day beneath a sky that once wept metal and acid, what other atmospheres have we inherited without ever knowing? Perhaps the answer isn't only in the ground, or in the rock, or in the memory of air. Perhaps the answer is in color. Not as decoration, not as beauty, but as signal. Because collapse, though often silent, often slow, has always had a color. What does collapse look like from space? Not from the ground, not from within it, but from far above, from orbit, from the soft distance where borders disappear and coastlines blur, and only the breath of the planet is visible. The Earth, seen from above, is not chaos. It is pattern, swirl, haze, tone. And when something begins to unravel, when balance begins to slip, the first sign is not sound, but shade. Collapse is not always sudden. It begins subtly, a deepening of brown in places that once shimmered green, a grayness that stretches too far where clouds used to form, a thick, unnatural yellow pooling over cities, lines of dust extending from the Sahara to the Amazon, like veins, the flicker of fire where forest should be, the slow retreat of white from mountaintop and pole. From far enough away, it all becomes a palette, and the palette changes. The green of photosynthesis, that soft pigment born from chlorophyll, from life gathering light, begins to fade. Not everywhere, but somewhere. The seasonal rhythms, once predictably shifting across hemispheres, begin to hesitate. Forests flicker between health and stress. Grasses grow dull before they disappear. Wetlands shrink into shapes that no longer pulse. From space, collapse is quiet, but it is not invisible. And sometimes, collapse carries its own luminescence. Algal blooms, once rare, glow in neon swirls across warming seas. Phytoplankton shimmer too early or too late. Rivers flush strange tones downstream. Iron-rich red, pollution-born violet, drought-tinted gold. Lakes dry into salt-crusted mirrors, catching light where water used to be. Ice melts from beneath, forming channels that pulse with turquoise, beauty born from imbalance. Could it be that color is Earth's earliest language of warning? Maybe not warning in the way we use the word. Not with urgency, but with inevitability. The Dust Bowl turned once green plains to gray. The ozone hole shimmered ultraviolet light in places where skin once walked freely. Wildfire skies turned orange in places that hadn't burned in centuries. Satellites see it all. They record not stories but changes, not meanings but measurements. And yet, the human eye still knows. Even without data, we feel when a color doesn't belong. What is the color of collapse? Is it beige, where jungle once stood? Is it silver, where glaciers calve into sea? Is it the dull brown of drying peat, the chemical blue of acidified bays, or the sickly green of stagnant water, stripped of oxygen? Maybe collapse isn't one color. Maybe it's a draining of color, a bleaching, a dimming, not because Earth is ending, but because one version of it is. There are moments in the past, long before satellites, long before cameras, when the sky may have changed color entirely. After massive volcanic eruptions, reports describe sunsets like blood. Ash high in the stratosphere refracting light into strange halos, giving the moon an amber cast, painting the sun with a sickening halo. In those skies, collapse wasn't just visible, it was unmistakable. But what happens when we see it so slowly, we forget it ever looked another way? Could it be that part of collapse is not the event, but the forgetting? We adapt. Always. We find new beauty in the changing light. We recalibrate our eyes. A city filled with haze becomes normal. A brown hill replaces a green one and still holds charm. The coral loses color and we call it white, but what we've lost is not pigment but function. and the collapse continues gently, colorlessly, past the point where we still remember how it once looked. Maybe collapse is not the falling down, but the fading out. Not because no one notices, but because noticing too late becomes easier than remembering too clearly. Still, color holds meaning, and meaning can return. The green can come back sometimes, the blue can deepen, the gray can lift. Collapse is not always final. It is a turning, and sometimes after the turn the palette begins to shift again. But only if we look, only if we remember that the sky speaks too. And so we wonder, if collapse has a color, does recovery have one too? And yet, if sight can carry memory across centuries of change, what might sound still be holding, tucked in frequencies we've long since stopped listening to? Maybe the answer isn't just in sound. Maybe it's in breath. Because the air isn't only something we move through, it moves through us. Quietly, constantly, and with it, something deeper moves too. What if who we are isn't just shaped by place or time, but by the atmosphere itself? We inhale without thinking, without noticing, but each breath carries the fingerprint of a moment, the pressure of this season, the warmth of that wind, the molecules that pass through leaves, through oceans, through lungs not our own. Oxygen made by the photosynthesis of forests we'll never see. Nitrogen once fixed by storms. Water vapor once exhaled by glaciers. Each breath, a blend of the world's past and our present. Could it be that air shapes more than the body? Could it shape the mind? The climate we live in molds how we move, how we speak, how we sleep. It pulls at our metabolism, our circadian rhythms, our skin, our mood. High altitudes change blood. Humidity softens sound. The smell of approaching rain can stir emotion before we know why. Desert winds spark tension. Cold air makes us still. These aren't preferences. They're physiological memory. The body, listening. And if the body listens, might identity follow? Not in the way we name ourselves, but in the deeper layers, the ones built from breath and repetition. Could generations raised beneath thinner skies think differently than those raised under pressure? Could children born into heat respond more quickly to shade, to silence, to thirst? Might language itself, rhythm, cadence, volume, be tuned by atmosphere? The way sound carries through dry air. The way breath forms around warmth. Maybe, maybe not. But we know the brain needs oxygen. Not just for function, but for clarity, for emotion, for dreaming. And the oxygen we breathe is not constant. It has changed across time. It changes with elevation, with pollution, with pressure. What happens to the mind when the air grows thick, or thin, or strange? In the fossil record, there are times when oxygen spiked, when it filled the atmosphere in levels far higher than today. Insects grew enormous. Fire spread easily. And perhaps, if there were minds then, they thought in different rhythms, lived in a different tempo, felt the world with a different pulse. Could air hold memory that we don't just breathe in, but become? And could changes in air lead to changes in identity we don't even notice? Not because we resist, but because we adapt. Slowly, patiently, until the way we move, the way we feel, the way we remember, is different. Not because we've changed, but because the air has. And so we wonder, who are we really? Are we the sum of our thoughts, or the sum of what our atmosphere allows us to think? Are we shaped by the climate of our birth, not just culturally but cellularly? We like to imagine ourselves as separate from the sky, but every breath says otherwise. Every exhale returns to the air a version of us, full of carbon, full of heat, full of emotion. Maybe the sky is not just above us. Maybe it's within us. And maybe, slowly, the atmosphere is not just the story of Earth, but the story of the self. And yet, if identity can rise and fall with pressure and heat, with breath and sky, then what parts of us might already belong to futures we have not yet inhaled? Maybe the answer lies not in the future, but in the rhythm of the past. A rhythm we did not write, but still carry. Not in stories or language, but in layers, in patterns, in marks left behind by the slow turning of time. Because seasons, those subtle pulses of temperature and light, do not simply pass. Sometimes, they stay. There are places where seasons have been fossilized. Not as snow or leaf or wind, but as memory embedded in the body of the world. Tree rings, coral growth, glacier cores. Silent records written not in ink, but in rhythm. Each ring, each layer, each frozen band holds a piece of a year. A season stretched thin into structure. A breath frozen into time. A tree does not grow the same way all year. Spring pushes fast and wide. Summer thickens. Autumn slows. Winter stills. And when the next year begins, a new layer starts again. Beside the old, around it, building a memory that rises upward. When we cut into that memory, the rings unfold like whispers. Wet years. Dry years. Cold spells. Heat waves. Volcanic ash caught in wood grain. The breath of fire recorded in cellulose. Could a tree remember the climate of a century ago? Not in thought, but in form. And in the oceans, coral grows by season, too. Microscopic bands of calcium carbonate form in pulses, influenced by light, by nutrient flow, by temperature. Under a microscope, coral skeletons resemble time-lapse topographies. Pale for growth, dense for stress, dark where the ocean once warmed too quickly. Coral bleaches but doesn't forget. The layers remain, marking the passage of invisible currents. Even glaciers, vast and slow, keep count. Snow falls year by year and never melts. Each winter compresses the last, forming layers that stretch deep beneath the surface. A single meter may hold a decade. A core may hold 500,000 years. These layers are not smooth. They fluctuate. Dust, ash, trapped air, isotopic shifts. Summers grow sharper. Winters blur. But the rhythm remains. Could these patterns be Earth's heartbeat? Could each cycle, each season, each subtle swing between light and dark, heat and frost, be the Earth breathing in slow motion? Maybe that's what we're seeing when we study these bands, not just data but pulse. And if the seasons are a kind of heartbeat, what happens when that beat changes? There are moments, even in the most ancient records, when the rhythm skips. When the seasons no longer arrive as they once did. A sudden drought. A string of failed summers. A warm year followed by snowless decades. These anomalies don't just tell us what happened. They tell us what was expected, and what failed to arrive. And we begin to wonder, not just what the Earth remembers, but what it misses. What if climate is not only the background of life, but its metronome? A guide for when to migrate, when to bloom, when to rest. A memory shared by plants, animals, and atmosphere alike. Not because it was planned that way, but because everything alive tuned itself to the rhythm. And when that rhythm shifts, even by just a beat, the entire orchestra must adjust. Today we see those shifts. Trees blooming early. Birds flying late. Coral struggling to keep its pace. And deep inside the ice, the newest layers begin to blur. The rhythm grows more uncertain. Not gone, but unfamiliar. Maybe the Earth is still keeping time. But maybe the melody has changed. And if so, who is listening? We are. With satellites. With sensors. With cores and microscopes and algorithms. But also with memory. With intuition. With a quiet knowing that the breeze feels different. That the light lingers longer than it used to. That something has shifted. Could we, too, be recording seasons inside ourselves? Not in rings, but in rhythm. In breath. In the pace of our thoughts. The depth of our sleep. The cadence of our days. And yet, if the world has fossilized its seasons in stone and ice, in coral and tree, what else might it be recording now, in the layers still forming beneath our feet? And yet, if this much can be fossilized in rhythm, what might have slipped through the cracks of memory entirely? There is a strange silence in deep time. Not the silence of stillness, but of forgetting. Not everything that happens leaves a trace. The Earth records so much. But not everything survives erosion. Not everything withstands subduction. Some memories are washed into the sea. Others are ground into powder beneath tectonic drift. And some are erased entirely, rewritten by forces so slow, so vast, that we do not even notice the loss. What has the Earth forgotten? It's not just a question of missing fossils or broken strata. It's something deeper, something quieter, like a face once known, now blurred, a song once sung, but no longer heard. We see gaps in the rock record, entire chapters missing. Millions of years gone, without even a scar to suggest their shape. We call them unconformities. And there is something profoundly unsettling about that word. Unconformity. As if time itself refused to behave. Refused to be neat. Refused to be remembered. And maybe that's what memory is on a planetary scale, not a constant recording, but a fragile agreement between past and present. A system that tries imperfectly to hold on. But what if that system forgets? Rain smooths mountains into silt. Wind unravels deserts. Oceans swallow coastlines whole. Even the continents drift, dragging ancient beaches into fire beneath the crust. Memory melts into magma. History turns to steam. And we, so brief, so recent, look at what remains and try to guess what used to be. Maybe Earth once held cities we'll never find. Maybe forests more complex than any today. Maybe skies filled with colors that never fossilized, and creatures that left no bone. Maybe entire epochs whispered past like dreams, and then dissolved. Could it be that we are not the first to wonder? That other eyes once looked up at a changing sky, felt time rushing past them, and asked the same quiet questions? Could they have disappeared not because they failed, but because the planet moved on? Not out of malice, not even indifference, but because that's what planets do. They forget, not because they are empty, but because they are full. Full of motion, full of change, full of endless cycles folding over each other. Ice to sea, sea to sky, sky to storm, storm to stone. And in that motion, memory is worn thin. Canyon here, a crater there, but between those landmarks, silence. There are no photographs of deep time, no voices carried across epochs. Only shadows in minerals, only isotope trails in trapped gas. Only guesses carved from half-finished puzzles. Even the fossils lie, or rather, they whisper just enough to confuse us. Just enough to wonder if the stories we're telling are the ones that were meant to be remembered, or simply the ones that were lucky enough to be left behind. And if that's true, what about now? What are we losing even as we live it? What fragments of today's sky, today's forests, today's thoughts, will survive 1,000,000 years from now? Will someone dig into what remains and read it like a story? Or will they stare into gaps and wonder? Planetary amnesia is not just about the past. It's also a mirror, a soft reminder that forgetting is not the opposite of memory. It is part of it. Just as erosion shapes mountains, forgetting shapes history. What is erased defines what remains. What is gone creates the shape of what is still here. And maybe, just maybe, the Earth forgets to make room. Room for new rhythms, new climates, new forms of life. Room for us. But if the planet forgets so easily, how can we remember? How do we hold on to the shape of a world always changing? Perhaps the answer isn't to cling, but to listen, to feel the gaps, to honor what's missing, to learn not just from what is visible, but from the silence around it. The broken layers, the missing years, the blank pages, because in that silence, there's wonder. And in wonder, maybe there is a kind of memory after all, not of details but of awe. And yet, if memory itself is weathered by time, if the Earth can forget what once lived, once thrived, once mattered, then what else or who else might we be forgetting even now? Above us, something new is forming, not born of volcanoes or meteorites, not sculpted by ice ages or tectonic tides, but still rising, not slowly like strata layered over millennia, but all at once and all around. A different kind of atmosphere, one not made of clouds, but of circuits. Not of thunderheads, but of signals. Satellites shimmer in their endless ballet across the sky, drawing invisible lines that crisscross our nights. We no longer look up and see only stars. Now there are blinks, pulses, arcs, mechanical, deliberate, humming softly in silence. This is the technosphere. Not a fantasy, not a theory, but a skin, a sheath, a layer we've woven over the earth, strand by strand. It is not just above us, it is within. In the air, carbon thickens not from ancient fires but from engines, wires, factories. Greenhouse gases climb. Their signatures, chemical and quiet, form fingerprints in the atmosphere. Carbon-12, carbon-13, ratios shifting just enough to whisper. Something has changed. Someone is here. Someone is leaving a trace. We are that someone. And the trace is not just carbon. It's plastic. It's aluminum. It's nanodust suspended in the upper stratosphere. There are polymers in the rainfall, particulates in the lungs of glaciers. Even the ocean spray carries fragments of our design. The technosphere is rising, not because it is loud, but because it is everywhere. And maybe we always do this. Maybe life always reshapes its cradle. Cyanobacteria once filled the air with oxygen, a byproduct, an accident, a transformation. Now our byproduct is heat, motion, signals, noise. We beam thoughts through satellites and stream dreams through towers. The air is no longer just weather. It is a medium, a carrier, a container. Could it be that Earth is learning to think in a different way? Not because it chose to, but because we are part of it. Not separate, but emergent. The technosphere is not a foreign skin. It is ours. But like a mirror too close to the eye, it reflects only fragments. We've wrapped the planet in data and light. But do we see it more clearly? Or less? We build machines that watch the atmosphere. And yet somehow the atmosphere watches back. It responds. The feedback loops tighten. Weather patterns grow stranger. Heat lingers longer. Currents hesitate. Jet streams wander. And in the background a slow, rising hum. As if the sky is adjusting to a new rhythm. Maybe we don't notice because we are too near. Maybe from far away, from the moon, from Mars, from some cold place beyond our orbit, Earth now glows a little differently. Maybe it pulses. Maybe it flickers. Maybe if you were watching from there, you'd say, something is happening. Something artificial. Something conscious or close. And yet, not all of it is light. There is shadow too. Emissions that do not speak. Particles that do not return. Dead zones that spread invisibly. And above us, the orbital graveyards. Husks of machines, fragments of collisions, loops of junk circling forever in silence. Even the sky has become a kind of archive. A kind of museum of things no longer useful but never quite gone. They drift, they spin, they fall, eventually. Is this what all civilizations do? Do they build skies? Do they sculpt their atmosphere, not with breath but with signal, heat, and decay? Could it be that, millions of years from now, geologists or something like them, will core through frozen clouds, slice open synthetic rock, and read the patterns of our age? Maybe they'll find a layer like no other. Carbon spiked, isotopes skewed, microplastics embedded in ice. A boundary in time. A moment when the air began to change not from nature, but from us. And maybe they'll wonder, who were they? What did they build? Why did they write their story in the sky? And yet, if we are now the writers of atmosphere, the sculptors of weather, the authors of air, what are we forgetting as we rise? What memories are being overwritten? Right now, by the hum of our own design. And yet, if we are now the authors of air, tracing stories into the sky with signal and ash, then what ancient gases still whisper between our lines? What elements, older than memory, still shape the breath that keeps us alive? Oxygen, the silent gift. The breath we forget to notice. The element we owe everything to and yet one we may never fully understand. It floats through us, invisible, weightless, patient. It fuels our thoughts, our muscles, our dreams. We speak because of it. We move because of it. We live because of it. And still, it is not simple. We often imagine oxygen as purity, as life, as light. But in deep time its presence was once unthinkable. There was an age before breath, before green, before rust, before lungs, when the planet exhaled methane and swallowed hydrogen. And then, something happened. Cyanobacteria bloomed in ancient oceans, drifting like microscopic lanterns, exhaling oxygen as waste. Slowly, impossibly slowly, the skies began to shift. But oxygen did not arrive as a gift. Came as a revolution, a poison to the life that came before. It oxidized metals, silenced organisms, reshaped chemistry. It rusted the world, quite literally, turning Earth's iron seas into red beds of sediment. It was not gentle. It was not balanced. It was transformative. And even now it holds both creation and danger. Because oxygen is not simply good. It is reactive, corrodes, it burns. It ages. Too little, and the flame of life flickers out. But too much, and the flame consumes. Forests catch fire more easily. Cells break down more quickly. Insects grow enormous. Breathing becomes a different act, one of urgency, not ease. There was a time when oxygen levels were far higher than today. The Carboniferous era. Thick jungles, towering ferns, dragonflies the size of hawks. Oxygen at 35. Air that could ignite with a single spark. It may have felt like paradise. Or maybe it was paradise only for some, a time of lushness and light but also of volatility. And then, oxygen fell again. As if the planet remembered its balance. Or forgot it. Maybe life learned to adjust. Maybe it had no choice. Because oxygen, in the end, is not a gift freely given, it is a rhythm, a tide. Rising and falling with photosynthesis and fire, with plankton and forests, with extinction and eruption. We like to believe the atmosphere is stable, permanent. But what if it isn't? What if oxygen is still searching for equilibrium? What if it never had one to begin with? And what about now? We live in a window, a narrow range, just enough to thrive, just enough to be awake. But human activity nudges this balance, not only through carbon, but through the slow undoing of the forests and algae that keep oxygen flowing. We cut, we burn, we acidify the oceans. And oxygen hesitates. Already, scientists observe dead zones, places where oxygen disappears from the sea, and nothing can survive. The breath of the ocean is silencing. Slowly, quietly, almost politely. Could it happen in the sky too? Maybe not all at once. But maybe not never. And maybe, just maybe, oxygen is not just the substance of life but the memory of it. A fossil in gas form. Each molecule exhaled by something living. Each breath we take built on the breath of those before us. Animals, trees, ancestors. It is both inheritance and erosion. Both gift and risk. Could it be that oxygen is the story of Earth trying to keep itself alive? And could it be that we are part of that story now? Not as authors, but as characters. And if so, what chapter are we in? We don't know. Not really. But we breathe. And in that breath is mystery, fragility, history, hope. And yet, if oxygen, the very breath of life, carries both creation and collapse, what else do we trust that may one day turn strange? And yet, if the very air we breathe can turn from healer to hazard, if oxygen is both memory and mirror, then what more might still lie waiting, perfectly preserved, beneath the surface of things? Glaciers do not speak in words. They whisper in layers, in silence, in stillness. Carved by cold and pressed by time, they move slowly, so slowly, and yet never sleep. To us, they may seem like scenery, quiet, blank, eternal. But to the earth they are a record, not a metaphor, but a literal memory. In the hidden corridors of Antarctic ice, in the long cores drawn like scrolls from Greenland's frozen heart, lie bubbles of air, tiny, fragile, impossibly ancient, no thicker than a hair, no louder than a sigh, and yet inside them is a voice older than language, the breath of a sky no longer known. What if ice remembers the forgotten air? Each bubble is a time capsule, a sample, a truth. Some are over 800,000 years old. A stretch of time so wide it folds in and out of the last 4 ice ages. Within them float molecules that once curled through the lungs of mammoths, or drifted above forests long turned to stone. Not ideas, not guesses, actual air, trapped, sleeping, waiting. Some of that air carries too much carbon, some too little. Methane levels that surge and fall like planetary heartbeats. Pollen grains that hint at jungles where now there is tundra. Acid traces from volcanic ash. Hints of fire and silence. And sometimes, things we don't yet understand. Could it be that the ice knows things we've forgotten? There are layers where the gas composition changes so suddenly, so sharply, that scientists pause. What happened here? Why would the air shift so fast? What burned? What vanished? Did something or someone trigger a change? The ice doesn't answer. It only reveals. And in this revelation, a strange feeling grows. Because this is not distant history. We breathe the descendants of that trapped air. The story flows into our lungs, and through us. Our own emissions, of fossil fuel, of war, of industry, have begun to write new lines in the sky, lines that the glaciers may never read again. Maybe the ice will melt before it remembers more. Maybe its voice will vanish before we've finished listening. And still, some try to hear more clearly. Scientists lower drills deep into frozen miles, listening not just for temperature or gases but for rhythm, for anomaly, for forgotten messages. There are moments, buried deep, where sulfur levels rise like ghost trails, and nitrates appear without cause. Could these be signs of ancient solar flares? Or the distant echoes of collapsing stars? What if the sky once flickered in ultraviolet flame, long before any eye could see it? Or what if the earth inhaled something strange, not from within, but from the cosmic wind? These are not answers, they are echoes. And the ice, for all its stillness, does not last forever. Cracks, calves. It weeps, not because it is weak, but because it remembers too much weight. Could it be that when glaciers melt, we lose not just water but memory? Not just habitat, but the last living archive of the air before the Anthropocene? Maybe, maybe not. And still they remain. For now, pale and massive, vast and silent, like sleeping gods pressed against the sea, their breath held in bubbles, their voices woven in frost. If we listen, truly listen, what might we hear? Perhaps the creak of tectonic plates beneath. Perhaps the sigh of buried climates. Perhaps the song of ice that once spoke to the sky. And yet, if ice can carry voices for nearly 1,000,000 years, what else might be waiting beneath our feet? Unspoken, unseen, but not unrecorded? Above us, the sky seems still. It stretches overhead like a great dome, soft and endless, watching without eyes. A vault of vapor and light. But what if it's more than a backdrop? What if it isn't just something we look at, but something that quietly looks back? The ancients spoke of the heavens not as emptiness, but as presence. A celestial dome that responded to sin or sacrifice, blessing or silence. Perhaps they saw something we have forgotten, that the sky is not passive. It is not separate. It is not asleep. Maybe the sky is listening. Not with ears, but with feedback loops and shifting winds, with heat held too long, or ozone stretched too thin, with clouds forming in places they never used to, with jet streams that wander off course, as if distracted by some thought we cannot name. Could it be that the atmosphere remembers? Not in stories or symbols, but in balance and change. When we burn, it warms. When we wound, it weeps. When we disturb the forest floor, the sky answers with drought, or flood, or dust. Not as punishment, not as vengeance, but as response, as breath, because the atmosphere isn't fixed. It's alive in the way rivers are alive, not conscious perhaps, but not inert. It flows, it learns, it adjusts, maybe not because it wants to, but because it must. For billions of years, the sky has been Earth's mirror and its mask. It has shielded, filtered, trapped, and reflected. When great volcanoes erupted, the sky dimmed itself, drawing curtains of ash to protect the land from the sun. When forests stretched across Pangaea, The sky grew richer in oxygen, filling its lungs with the scent of chlorophyll and flame. When the dinosaurs fell, it remembered not in grief but in chemistry. And now it watches us. It watches us heat it, seed it, map it, fill it with satellites and signals and exhaust. We think of ourselves as observers. But maybe we are participants in something larger, a conversation made of molecules and momentum. Could it be that climate itself is the sky's response? Maybe, maybe not. The concept isn't new. In the 1970s, the Gaia hypothesis proposed something bold, that the Earth behaves as a self-regulating system. That atmosphere, ocean, rock, and life are not separate chapters, but one story told many ways. Some laughed, some listened, and the sky said nothing, but shifted, slowly, quietly. What if the air we breathe is part of a larger intelligence, not human, not alien, but emergent? Born of interaction, not intention? It doesn't think like us. It doesn't need to. It adjusts in increments, in trends, in patterns we barely understand. Like a sleeping tide with memory. What if the sky doesn't need to speak? Because it acts. When radiation increases, it thickens its veils. When CO2 accumulates, it invites the heat to linger. When we open the Arctic, it lets methane rise. Each reaction a gesture. Each fluctuation a whisper. And yet, we rarely notice. Because the sky is always there. Too vast to hold. Too soft to fear. Too old to hear. But perhaps, if we quiet ourselves, we might sense it. In the shimmer before a storm. In the stillness of a windless dusk. In the strange familiarity of a sunset that feels off. Maybe it's not watching us with judgment. Maybe it's watching the way a forest watches or a glacier watches, not with thought but with presence. With patience. And perhaps, like the oldest stones, it carries more than we think. More memory. More warning. More wonder. Because if the sky is alive in its own way, then we are never alone. We are cradled inside something vast and awake, even if we cannot see its eyes. And yet, if the sky responds to what we do, if it reflects our actions not just in climate but in rhythm, what else might it carry back to us? What might we be saying, without even knowing we've spoken? And yet, if the sky can watch, and ice can whisper, and the air itself can carry memory, what about us? What about the rhythms we leave behind, not as individuals but as civilizations? Civilizations breathe, not with lungs but with momentum. They inhale through invention, expansion, hunger, hope. They exhale in firelight and foundation stones. In song, in ash, in broken pottery forgotten beneath centuries of quiet dust. They rise from river valleys and coastlines, tethered to rain cycles and sun angles. They fall when the patterns shift, when the crops wither, when the air thickens, when the balance tips and the land says no more. Some civilizations inhaled once and never again. Could it be that history isn't a line, but a lung? That human flourishing comes in waves, in pulses, in long slow exhales of creativity, followed by the stillness of collapse? In the Indus Valley, water once flowed in careful grids through a city of engineers and traders, their language now unreadable, their myths long quiet. In the Andes, stone cities rose where clouds kissed mountaintops, only to vanish beneath moss and memory. In Mesopotamia, breath was carved in cuneiform, and then swallowed by salt and sand. Always a pattern. A rise, a crest, a pause. Maybe we are in a pause now. Maybe we are not at the end or the beginning, but the breath between. What if this moment, this now, is not permanent but transitional? A soft inhalation, or a long exhale we can't yet feel? And if so, what will the wind carry from us? Not because we have vanished yet, but because even the present fades. The roads we drive, the satellites above us, the signals we beam through the ionosphere. All of it temporary. All of it breath. Even our atmosphere remembers us differently now. The carbon isotopes drifting in today's air are not like those of our ancestors. They carry fingerprints, coal, oil, concrete, fertilizer. They mark a civilization in full inhale, a civilization burning fast. But civilizations are not machines. They don't break all at once. They slow. They pause. They flicker. And then, something changes. Something forgets. What if we, too, are becoming part of the geological rhythm? A layer, not a headline? In the future, will they find us in sediment cores and trace metals? In microplastics sunk into the deepest trenches? In radiation rings embedded in tree bark? Maybe, maybe not. But something will remain. Not cities. Not nations. But breath marks. In pollen counts. In isotopic ratios. In chemical shadows we did not mean to leave behind. Because air keeps score. Stone keeps time. Oceans remember in salt. Civilizations breathe, and sometimes they sigh. Not because they fail, but because they change shape. And sometimes between those shapes there is silence. A pause so long it becomes invisible. The breath between civilizations is not a moment. It's an age. An intermission written in silence, in forest regrowth, in cooling ruins and animals returning to places that forgot their names. We may not know if we are breathing in or breathing out. We may not know if this is a rise or the hush before the fall. But the earth has felt this before. The atmosphere has carried this kind of breath. The soil has cooled beneath fallen empires. The stars above have seen us disappear and begin again. And still there is time. Because in every breath, even between, there is the possibility of another. And yet, if this is only one breath in a longer rhythm, what will the next inhale bring? And how long must we wait to feel it? This next breath. This slow inhale of history stirring once more. Maybe not long at all. Maybe the air is already shifting, already humming with something familiar. Something ancient. Something green. Because what if the sky turned green again? Not just in memory. Not just in echoes. But for real. A veil of color spread across the horizon. Not a trick of the sunset. Not a storm's afterglow. But a warning, a whisper, a wound. Would we see it? Would we remember? Long before the first forests there were green skies. Not emerald like fields or soft like moss. But metallic, eerie, electric. A chemical breath tinted with methane, with haze, with particles from volcanoes erupting from the ocean floor. A signal of imbalance. Of fermentation on a planetary scale. The kind of sky you don't just look at, you feel. You taste it on your tongue. You sense it in your bones. It was not a sky for us. But it came before us. And what if it returns? Scientists once called it Canfield Ocean. A time when Earth's seas were suffocating in iron. And the sky grew dim with the exhale of microbes. Greenhouse gases layered like blankets, trapping warmth, muting light. Life still moved, yes, but slowly. In different forms. In different rhythms. Maybe not thriving. But persisting. Could it happen again? Maybe, maybe not. But the signals whisper from the poles and from the deep sea. From thawing permafrost and changing cloud patterns. Methane slumbers beneath Arctic lakes. In icy hydrate cages waiting to dissolve. And when the ice melts, what else melts with it? If the sky turned green again, would we recognize the signs? Would we call it an anomaly? Or a memory? And more than that, would we listen? Not just with instruments and data and long strings of numbers, but with presence. With reverence. With a hush so deep we might actually hear what the planet is trying to say. Because green is not just life. Green is also warning. It is also decay. A forest too lush too fast. Algae blooms fed by imbalance. Chlorophyll glowing where it should not. Earth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it glows. There are colors in the sky we've forgotten how to read. Tints we dismiss as coincidence. As pollution. As luck. But what if they're language? What if the atmosphere, in all its swirling silence, has been speaking this whole time? Through color, through dust, through chemical change. Maybe the sky is trying to wake us. Not with thunder, not with fire, but with memory. And memory isn't just in rocks or ice or genes. It's in reflection, in looking up and feeling a sense that something is different. Even if we can't name it, even if we can't prove it. That uncanny stillness before a storm. That glow that doesn't match the hour. That smell of ozone that feels like déjà vu. Green skies don't arrive uninvited. They are summoned by time, by imbalance, by the slow churn of entropy returning to the surface. And still, they are beautiful. Not because they are safe, but because they are real. Because they remind us that we live within a system far older, far more intelligent, far more patient than us. A system that keeps the score even when we forget we are playing. Perhaps the green is not an end, but an awakening, a signal to slow, to listen, to remember what we are breathing, what we are burning, what we are becoming, because we are not separate from the atmosphere. We are in it, of it, made by it. Every breath we take reshapes it, and every breath it takes reshapes us. So if the sky turns green again, let us not rush to explain it away. Let us not ignore the whisper. Let us lie still. Let us look up. Let us wonder. And yet, if green was only one of the colors Earth can wear, what other skies have we never seen? What other shades have drifted above lands long erased, over oceans that have folded back into themselves, over mountains that no longer rise? Some say the sky forgets. That wind is amnesia. That clouds pass too quickly to hold memory. That air is too thin to archive the weight of history. But what if that's not true? What if the sky remembers? Not in the way that stone remembers, heavy, patient, unmovable, but in whispers, in fragments, in diffusion and drift. Maybe the sky is the most fragile library of all, and every breath we've taken has written something into it. Not words, not stories, but traces, isotopes, ratios, patterns, the soft exhale of time, encoded not in paper or code or fossil, but in motion, because we don't vanish all at once. Civilizations don't disappear overnight. They thin, like mist, like breath, and in that thinning, something of us lingers. In the nitrogen, in the carbon, in the dust, our presence not carved into monuments, but suspended in atmosphere, riding the currents like a ghost that doesn't know it's departed. Maybe the sky remembers the warmth of ancient fires, of hearths and cities and burned forests. Maybe it carries the soot of war and celebration alike. Maybe it holds the pollen of gardens that no longer bloom, the ash of books that no longer exist, the scent of oceans that once touched continents now vanished. Not because the sky cares, but because it cannot help it, because it breathes us in. We exhale our history, and the sky keeps it without intention, without emotion, without judgment. As if the atmosphere is a kind of dream we all live inside, constantly rewritten by every species that ever lived and ever died. And we, in turn, live inside that dream. We breathe what others breathed. Not metaphorically, truly. At the atomic level, the air we take in has passed through millions of lungs. Birds, mammoths, pharaohs, volcanoes, wildfires, machines. Each molecule of oxygen, each wisp of vapor, each fragment of carbon dioxide is part of a long, invisible inheritance. An archive in motion. Could it be that long after we are gone, the sky will still speak our name? Not loudly, not clearly, but with the softest trace. A curve in an isotope, a deviation in the oxygen cycle, a thin plastic thread floating in the stratosphere, all telling a story not of who we were, but that we were. Maybe that's all remembrance is, not an account, not a memory, but a change, something altered by our presence, something that behaves differently because we pass through. And so we wonder, if we vanish slowly, quietly, entirely, will the sky one day breathe without us, yet still carry the faint perfume of who we were? Perhaps the answer lies in the air bubbles trapped inside ancient ice, or the dust settled on the upper atmosphere from burned cities. Perhaps it waits in the delicate signature of carbon-14, drifting ever thinner, or in the decay curve of tritium, marking a brief flicker of atomic light and human fear. A spectral fingerprint left not in stone, but in sky. We often ask what kind of world we will leave behind. But maybe the deeper question is, what kind of sky? One filled with echoes, or silence? A sky that moves on, or one that holds us, for just a little longer? It's easy to believe we are forgettable. That time erases us. That Earth is too vast, too ancient, too entropic to remember. But maybe that's only half the story, because forgetting isn't always absence. Sometimes forgetting is layering, burying, mixing, diluting, like ink in water, like smoke in fog, like breath in atmosphere, still there, just quieter. Maybe the sky doesn't forget us. Maybe it learns how to carry us differently. So if, someday, a distant future breathes what we left behind, not our language, not our buildings, not even our bones, but our imbalance, our warmth, our dust, would they hear us? Would they recognize the ghost in the wind? Would they call it memory? Or would it simply be weather? And yet, if the sky can remember this much, a breath,